have a task for you, Alex.
Welcome to the podcast. Got a theme song at last. Even got a guy to play his guitar. Now I need to come up with the words to sum up what the show is about, and I'm stuck. What a predicament.
Welcome to What a Predicament with your predicament-minded private eye, Alex Bain. Back after a little bit of a delay due to this COVID-19 they have now. I tell you what, a lockdown does put a damper on hitting the streets to investigate whatever predicament one is plagued with that week. And any trivial topic seems kind of redundant in an age of viral pandemics and worldwide protests. It'd be a whole lot easier if I didn't have to research anything, if I could just make it up on the spot. So today, I'm pondering the oldest profession of all. Improvisation. After all, improv gave us such iconic moments as the late great Gene Wilder's Tumble and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the late great Han Solo's I Know and The Empire Strikes Back, and half the stuff said whenever you pointed a camera at the late great Robin Williams. Maybe making it all up on the spot could do wonders for What a Predicament too. Normally these podcasts are written in advance. I consider myself more of a writer than an entertainer, so while my podcast may not be entertaining, you can't say it isn't written. But when I think about it, when I interview someone, isn't that conversation improv? Aren't all conversations improv? This that I'm reading, I've pre-written, but at the time that I wrote it, was it improv? In an attempt to MacGyver together a season 3 finale circa a global pandemic, I thought I should get some tips from someone who's made making it up on the spot his alternative lifestyle. I am jazzed to introduce my first guest. You've heard some of Cy Hart's original music on previous episodes of What a Predicament. He has a performing arts degree in jazz guitar with 16 years of jazz gigging under his belt. This is long overdue, Mr. Cy Hart. So, not too many gigs lately with the whole coronavirus thing?
No. Very few gigs on at the moment. Can't really play to people when no one can show up, eh?
How did you manage to make do during the lockdown where, no venues or events were going ahead?
Well, my wife and I were in a little wee band called Ellie, and instead of, and we've got a couple of band members, and instead of obviously performing, we just focused on composing and working on... we actually spent quite a lot of time working on our technical ability, to be honest. Just thought of it as a time to do a bit of, get in the gym, get the vocal gym going, get the finger gym going, and do some scales, do some runs. Just worked on technique, actually. That's how we sort of got through it.
I can imagine with jazz, there's a certain, because you're following a flow, that in front of a live audience and the energy in the room, it may affect your performance. Is there much of a difference between trying to track a jazz solo in the studio versus live in front of an audience?
Oh my goodness, yes. I actually prefer to record my my jazz tracks actually to a live audience. So actually the last bunch of songs I recorded, me and my band got together and we went to a recording studio. And the cool thing about jazz is you kind of can't do songs in segments. You don't lay down the drums and lay down the, bass. It's just everything happens at once. Everyone just mics up and you just go for it. And you might do a couple of takes of each song, but everyone's just all playing at the same time because you need to feed off each other. And when you improvise in a solo, you might do things that the other musicians respond to, and that sort of inspires you and eggs you on to then do something else. And so, when you're recording jazz, it has to be all done together. So when I record, the last recording we did, we all set up, and then we actually opened it up to an audience, and we just fed off that and just ended up laying down a real sick EP. It was so cool. Really, really loved it. And I think because of the live audience there, for me personally, but all jazz musicians would say the same thing. You just feed off, you not only feed off the band, but you feed off sort of people. Because in jazz, people clap after each solo, so they'll be clapping mid-song. yeah, you definitely feed off it. So 100%, yeah.
At an average jazz gig, how much of the time is spent literally improvising versus just holding down some chords or whatever?
Well, I mean, jazz by nature just is improvisation. I mean, a typical way a song would go, or a typical form of a song, is you sort of have a melody that you play, which is over a set, bunch of chords, and you play a melody. And to a jazz musician, that might be discernible as a melody, but to the rest of the world, some people just think that, it's just noise or elevator music, which is, they're cool. But yeah, there's a melody that you'll play over a set number of chords, which will go through a set number of bars. So it might be 32 bars, or it could be any odd number of bars. And then once you've played the melody, then basically everyone just improvises and takes a turn. And, say it was a 5-piece band and you had drums and bass and you had keys, guitar and saxophone. The saxophone might go first, and the piano, and then the guitar. And you might sort of feed off each other. But there's no sort of rules. It's kind of just in the moment, whatever the band feels like doing goes. So, like, somebody might just decide to lead a song and be like, look, I want, you might throw out just a few ideas at the beginning, like, hey, let's just sort of take trades and we'll just take turnabout, and the solo of the song will just be us sort of interlocking and weaving together, So I've heard great musicians and great bands do that, and it's on certain songs, and that's really cool. Or you just, the saxophone goes, then the guitar goes, and the piano goes. But either way, the whole thing's improvised, and the drums and the bass, each time they play the main melody of the song, in jazz we call it the head of the song. The drums won't play it the same way, the bass won't play it the same way twice, and nor will the backing chords be played the same way. Everything's always different. So although there might be a set melody, you might play it with slight variations rhythmically. So by essence, jazz, just no song is ever played the same. That's the kind of style of music it is, and it's super exciting to be part of, and so much fun. I remember catching a jazz bug when I was younger and being super hyped on it. I remember catching up with some mate who'd been through the trenches of jazz school where I studied, and he'd done his yards there, and he was a fantastic musician now. I remember talking to him about how hyped I was on it, and he looked at me and smiled and said, "You've caught the bug." And I just totally had this. Improvising was just this whole new world. I'd grown up learning classical music, which is much more structured, and there's a set form, and you just play the same song. It's just the same song every time, and yeah, you might have dynamic variations or the way you might play it. You might, have slight pauses or, accelerations at different points of the song. But in general, the song, the melody, the note, the rhythm, it's always the same, which is beautiful in itself. But yeah, jazz is I just remember catching the bug and being like, oh my gosh, you can play a song. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want, for how long you want. And it's just totally up to you in that moment. And that just totally clicked with me and my personality type. And I just never looked back. So I just love it. Still love it to this day.
Speaking of going to jazz school, if you cast your mind back to when little Simon was first walking through those hallowed doors, what are some of the very first lessons you learnt about what improvisation specifically is?
Yeah, that's I love that question. I mean, I could honestly monologue at you for like an hour and not shut up, because
it's not a case where they're just like, the rule is there are no rules.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, it's kind of ironic that there's even a jazz school, because I actually remember my teacher saying to me in my second year, he's like, none of you really need to be here if you all just listen to music, copy what other improvisers have done, and then you'll just find your own spin. He's like, he just said the school would be redundant if everyone did that. It's just no one does that these days. But that's actually how all the jazz greats learned, and that's how they pioneered. They just sort of listened to each other. None of them went to schools. A few went to music schools, but in terms of, but they wouldn't have learnt necessarily jazz in the way it is now when they were pioneering it back in the day. There's a few lessons and things, a few little tricks to improvisation, but essentially, everyone has their own voice to share, and some people might be more rhythmic with their improvisation. Some people might be super shreddy and just play lots of notes, which is fine. Some people are real spacious and like to develop a melody. Some people are just quote a lot of different sort of songs or do variations on the melody. But essentially, the way how it was sort of explained to me in its most simple form is you have a song and a key, and you have to obviously improvise in that key, because if you improvise in a different key, then that's going to sound bad. And you'll have a set number of notes for that key that will sound good. And then I remember the most basic lesson, I still think it's just the gold, it's still a gold lesson to me now, is you just basically come up with rhythms and just start making stuff up. And that's all it is, like, just start making stuff up. You might come up with an idea in your head and just play it, and that might be, often it's always a rhythm to begin with. It might be ba 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 ba. You might, pick some random notes and do that, da 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 da. And then I suppose as the more you practice, you learn to develop these motifs. So you might have a motif to begin with, and then the way you end that first motif might be the way you start the next motif. And then by the time you get to your fifth or sixth motif, you might start like coming back to that first motif. So you have a bit of a theme that plays throughout your, and this, I mean, at the end of the day, there are no rules to improvisation. It's just somebody expressing themselves over a set of chords, basically. In its simplest form, it's just pick a few notes that sound good over that particular key that the song's in, and just the only way to start, I think, is just to play, just see what comes out. And there's all these things you can do, like you can do rhythms development and motif development, and you can do subdivisions, and you can do space and phrasing. And there's all these things that you can, learn and spend, you can spend a year on any one of those topics. But I'd say the best thing to do is pick a few notes, start playing, and just listen to the greats. Listen to Miles Davis, listen to John Coltrane, listen to these people, see what they do, and steal their ideas. And it's kind of like, if once you can imitate, then you can innovate. I think it's probably a nice little wee line that I think has always been helpful for me. Imitate first and then innovate.
So if that's the sort of lessons you were learning at jazz school, what have you learnt out there in the real world after gigging for X amount of years, that your personal takeaways?
Yeah, I think when I came out of jazz school, I probably would overplan my improvisation, and it's probably just an element of maturity. As you get older, you don't feel like you need to impress people or prove yourself as much. So you just become more content with like how you play, because there's no right or wrong way to play or improvise. And some people just, they might just be able to play very quickly, and their brain can just think at that speed. Or like, I often think of Miles Davis, and all his solos are just, all his most famous solos, most famous songs are just really chill. It's a slow BPM, pace of the song's not too quick. And he just crafts a really beautiful melody that sounds as if he's spent years writing it, like he's been Beethoven and Mozart, and he's just agonized over this melody, and he's memorized it, and then he's just played something he's memorized that he's crafted over a year. But in fact, he's just made that up in the moment. And it's not about speed, he's not shredding, he's not playing heaps of notes, he's just developed a melody on the spot, used lots of space, and it's just beautiful. And I think that's probably what I've learned since jazz school, is just being okay with like finding my sound, because it's quite hard when you've got assessments and you're trying to keep up with other people or prove yourself or like meet the demands of, I suppose, a degree, because that's the system, that's the game. It can be kind of hard when you're in that context to really truly find your sound and what your sound is. And I think since leaving, I've really developed and become content with like how I play. And I suppose for me, I just really like to create a beautiful melody and craft a melody that I've got motifs, and I've developed it, and it's evolved, and each note I play is very deliberate, and it's not about playing the most hardcore flashy scale or interval or some crazy sequence. It's all about ideas. But that's what really gets me hyped. So other people get really hyped off just shredding or doing crazy sequences and having almost quite a mathematical sort of way to do it. And that doesn't mean it's any less brilliant or has any less integrity. It's just different people express themselves differently. And I think that's what I've learned, is like I express myself. Yeah, I think I've really model off Miles Davis, and I want to sound, I suppose, more in that sort of style. So that's probably what I've learned. Just you discover your sound and become content with what you can do and what you can't do. And yeah, it's wonderful. I just get so much joy from it. Got 2 kids now, so it's a bit harder to play. When you've got 2 little kids running around screaming at you, but other than that, it's great.
I mean, Miles Davis, that's some pretty lofty heights. Have you ever done an Icarus and like flown too close to the sun and like in improvising when you don't have a sheet music that you're following? Have you ever failed? Like, has it gone terribly wrong at a gig where you've gone in a direction and just been like, oh no, what am I doing? Or
oh my
just
God,
crashed and burned?
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's just how you learn, right? You try stuff and it's like, oh, shit, that did not sound good. That bombed. I think that's just how you learn, yeah. It's funny you talk about that. Like, obviously I'll never be able to sound like Miles Davis, but I think he's an absolute legend and I'm so inspired by his sound. And I just find that so motivating for me. I just find it inspiring. I listen to his music and I like it. I don't want to sound exactly like him, but it's like I love how he plays and how he improvises. So I'm studying, I suppose, the Miles Davis art form, and I'll probably study that for the rest of my life. There's only been one Nelson Mandela, or there's only been one Muhammad Ali, and there's only one Miles Davis, and I think he's sort of left a legacy, and I'm going to just probably spend the rest of my life sort of studying that sort of style and learn to play in that way. So, yeah, I don't think you can ever really bomb out when you sort of found the thing you want to do. You only bomb out when you're trying to overextend yourself and play something that's not actually you. But then to find the sound and to find yourself, you have to bomb out and try and play like other players or think you're another sound. And then you have to do that because then you learn, oh, crap, that just didn't, there's no integrity in that solo, or that really doesn't feel like me, and I really don't connect with that. And, yeah, I think that just comes with growth as a musician, for sure.
So does it work the other way, sort of the opposite of bombing, where you find you're in the zone and you don't know how this thing is coming out of your fingers?
Oh, man. Oh, yeah, it's funny how you call it the zone. It's the zone, the bubble. And, yeah, I've definitely had, I think, maybe the greats just knew how to tap into that and could always reach that. I think for me as a lowly jazz peasant, I think I probably can, with all honesty, say I've hit that zone probably 3 times in my life where I've been at a gig, and for the whole set, it's just, I've been in the zone, and everything I played, it was just like, what is coming out? But I was just so connected to the music, so like present in the room and in the space I was in, and just my fingers were responding to everything that was in my head. And, you definitely have those moments. And there's probably like, the day was less stressful or whatever the hell, the week that leading up, you were just in this real positive mindset. Who knows what it is? But, yeah, I've probably only had that a few times. And other times I reckon I get close to it. But, yeah, I think that's just always a journey just to try and get into that space when you're in that bubble, when you're in that zone. And, your anxiety or your nerves just don't sort of, or your doubt don't corrupt your thoughts, which I think then corrupts your playing. But I think the older I've gotten, the more secure I've become as a person. And then I think my playing just is, I suppose, playing just is better and more consistent because I'm less focused on like what do people think, or people, you just really you love yourself, you love the sound you're doing, and because you love that, you hope that makes some people happy, and others might not vibe off it, and that's okay because you can't make everybody happy. Yeah.
Something like self-love or the ability to be in the moment are like much more important life lessons than just how well you can play guitar. What has all of your improv experience, what effect has it had on your life as a person, broader than just being able to play music?
Yeah, I think, you hear that actually in all top sort of genres, like, a top sports team, they talk about, like, a great sports team, it's about creating great people off the pitch, not just on the pitch, they're actually good people, they're kind, they have integrity, they're honest, hardworking, they're like that in the spotlight and out of the spotlight, and there's that character that sort of, that I suppose defines their character, and I think that's sort of been my journey with improv. I think I had to learn to. I think a lot of my insecurities, in my early years, would have affected my playing, and then the self-doubt creeps in, and then you just can be spirals when you're improvising. You're like, oh, this sucks, and you just get in a real bad negative space. And I think what I've learned over time is just being okay with who you are and what you can offer. And I'm not going to be Miles Davis, I'm not going to be the next jazz great, but what I can do is just be really grateful, and I think gratitude is the key from my point of view to any great player or anyone in any profession, if you're grateful in all aspects of your life, I think, funnily enough, it actually just does make you, for me, I think it has made me play better. I think if you're grateful, you don't really care if you play better either. Like, you're just grateful that, I've got this cool musical gift, and you're just grateful that you can even pick up a guitar and go play, You're grateful that you can write music. You're just so hyped and so stoked on this gift that you have. And then because you're so hyped and stoked on it, you just can't but help share that and play with other people. And I think other people vibe off that as well. And yes, I think going through my 20s, certainly now into my 30s, I'm definitely just so grateful. I feel just much more gratitude than I ever have. And I think that gratitude has just made me a more positive person. And yeah, that definitely helps me with my improvising. So I haven't done that to get better at improvising. I've just done that because that's just brought me a quality of life that I want. It's tiring being bitter or angry or anxious and depressed. That doesn't mean you don't go into phases of that. Like, obviously, being human, and you have those days and you have those moments. But mindfulness and practicing gratitude, I think, are the things that help you get through the tough times in life. And the more you do it, the more resilient you get. And I think the effect of that then means that, like, when you comes to the thing that you love to do, it helps you, funnily enough, do that with, more passion and more drive and more gratefulness. And yeah, ultimately, I think what you produce sounds better. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Well, to bring it back to me as a podcaster, is there any advice you could give about how making stuff up on the spot could be a tool that I could use to make some great audio?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I think I don't know a whole lot about the podcast world, but I certainly think whatever gets you excited, however you express your creativity, and for me that might be music, for you that might be doing the podcast thing, and you express your creativity through that, and you might plan out some podcasts, but actually just improvising as well. Like, I suppose there's an element of improvisation that happens all throughout your podcast and you're interviewing people. You have to improvise on the spot and think on the spot. And, if you were totally prescribed and stuck to your same questions every single time, it would become a bit robotic. Like, you actually have to improvise and feed off the energy that I might be giving you or that the person you're interviewing might be giving you. And then you just and in some ways that is improvisation. This conversation then just flows. And I think that is the definition of improvisation. Together, you're sort of creating this podcast, this piece of art that didn't exist before. And, as long as you're free to allow space for the conversation to flow and not stick to some set rules or questions that would, I suppose, bind the creativity. I think as long as, you can go with the flow, then obviously that creates art. That's your form of art, and it is improvisation, I think, by definition. So, I think, I think that's it's any creative's journey. I think improvisation's in every creative's journey. I think, how can you create without improvising?
So you're saying What a Predicament, my podcast, is jazz?
That is 100% jazz. And totally, I actually totally agree. I do think that, I think it's, how can it not be? Jazz is, the foundation of jazz is improvisation, is creativity. It's being in the moment and in the flow, and I think that's exactly what you do when you interview people. So 100%. You're a jazz man. You're Miles Davis. You're the Miles Davis of podcast.
I was going to ask, what jazz musician would I be of the podcasting world? Like, is there someone who's like, oh yeah, he's got this particular style? But I'll take Miles.
Yeah, take Miles. Take Miles. Absolutely. John Coltrane. I don't know. No, you don't talk fast enough for that. Yeah, no, you're more the Miles style, just slow, but deliberate. It's good.
Sai spoke about not trying to impress people, and if that's the goal, my episode download numbers would indicate that I'm doing a good job. But unlike him, I'm not a trained musician. I'm not even an untrained musician. I don't know if I have the skills to just jump into a jazz-inspired, off-the-cuff recording session. Maybe I could freestyle rap, that's improv, but I'm worried everyone would just say, oh, he must have pre-written that, no one's flow is that sick. So instead, I'll go a different route and explore another avenue of improvised performance. Time to give Kathleen Burns a call. Kathleen is a multifaceted theatre maker and playwright, and has been an improviser with the Christchurch Court Theatre's Court Jesters since 2003, so there's no one better than her to help me get my yes and on. How was your lockdown?
Peaceful. So peaceful. Most people I've talked to had a pretty good lockdown. And yeah, I started running before dawn, which is not like me. And I don't know. I don't know what that was. I don't know. Things were getting primal. That's what that was.
Yes, and did you pivot and try and do any Zoom improv shows or anything like that? Or did it all just dry up for a wee while?
No, I did I think 3. I do this show called Dungeons and Comedians that was started by Brendan Bennett down here in Christchurch. And we did 3 Dungeons and Dragons adventures as these characters that we play via Zoom. And it was difficult. It was difficult, and you know what? I don't think it was my best work, but I'm glad that I did it. And like we had some very amazing fans, very particular fans of that show, and like their feedback was that it gave them something to look forward to when they were bored and locked down. So I think that was one of the few times that I'm like, yeah, I'm happy to do this, even though I feel like it's average, because it's bringing joy to someone. I don't know.
Yes, and I can imagine a game of Dungeons and Dragons is similar to improv in a way where you're in a scene and you're trying to react with stuff that's happening in the moment. But a show like Whose Line Is It Anyway might be the most well-known example of improv comedy. Is that pretty similar to the sort of performances you'd normally do?
It's similar to one of the shows that I do. I do a short-form show called Scared Scriptless. And, well, I mean, I say it's a short-form show. The classic version of it is a short-form show. But they're about to attempt 6 long-form shows that are heavily genred. So, yeah, I don't know. I started in short-form improv, like literally theatre sports. But, I don't know, those skills, the lines, the boundaries between those sort of forms get blurrier and blurrier.
Yes, and in general, what are the basic rules of improv that would apply to any of those ways of performing it? Could you talk about the philosophy of yes and?
Sure. Yes and is very much like a foundational element to improv that's used all over the world. I was taught it through like a very Keith Johnstonian model. He is like the father of theatre sports. And I certainly came from that kind of style of improv. But yeah, yes and. I mean, like the basic idea is like you're creating something out of nothing or not much with someone else, and you're going to put an idea out there, and someone's going to say yes to it, someone's going to add to it. And you know that when they put an idea out there, you're going to say yes to it and you're going to add to it. It's like a very, very basic collaboration tool. And definitely, I mean, I learned this technique when I was a teenager, and I'm 34 now, and I've sort of gone through these phases of like evangelically believing in it. Do you know what I mean? Like say yes to everything, add to everything, accept, which is all very wonderful. I think as I'm getting older, I'm finding things are a lot more nuanced, and I'm trying to be really conscious of like what is the yes, like what am I actually saying yes to? Because not all ideas are going to be good ideas, or not all ideas that are being improvised with me on stage are going to make me feel safe and inspired. So it's, for me, as I get older, I'm more like, what is the yes that I'm finding? It's not a tool for blind acceptance and blind agreement. Yeah. Oh, gosh, I got like a whole lot more deeper way quicker than what I was intending.
Yes, and I can imagine there's an art form to trying to steer away from an idea without straight up shooting down the person if they offer something in a scene.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of what that is like you building up the trust with whoever you're playing with. I love rules about improv and exploring frameworks and then disregarding them in the next breath and trying something else. But something that Rebecca de Unamuno once said to me, and she's an Australian improviser. She's incredible. I learnt heaps from her. And I remember her saying to me, and it wasn't even like in a context of a workshop, this was like casual over a beer sort of thing. She was like, what it comes down to is just, you're going to find people that you like playing with, keep playing with them. And that kind of is how I improvise some of my best work. I'm playing with my friends.
Yes, and what are the risks with a scriptless show? Has it ever gone terribly wrong?
Yes, and did you just start a question by saying yes and?
Yes, and I did. I'm trying to learn how improv can affect my everyday life. Maybe help me be a better podcaster.
So what did I just say? It's not about blind acceptance.
Yes, you're wrong.
What are you saying yes to me about?
Yes, and I'm acknowledging and agreeing with you and adding another question.
Okay, what's the other question?
What are the risks with a scriptless show as opposed to a scripted show? Has it ever gone terribly wrong where I'm sure in the history of doing it, there's been times when things that have been chucked out there just have not worked?
Oh my gosh, like a million times. A million times. Yeah, that happens all the time. There's the old stock line that people use in improv shows of like, just at the beginning of like, just so you know, we put some bad ones in on purpose, just so you know it's improvised. But that's part of the joy of it. Some people like watching a car crash. And the thing that, and this is kind of why I love improv, and probably why I haven't become a stand-up, is that like with improv, I'm like, man, if I do something that tanks, if this really sucks, there's a good chance that in the next couple of minutes, I'll do something that you'll like. So I don't know. I feel like there's always a way to rewrite history with improv.
Yes, and how has years, you've sort of touched on this before, but how has years of improv impacted your day-to-day life? Do you find it's helped you be more spontaneous or not shoot down ideas when someone's like, well, we should do this weekend? Or...
Right. Has it helped my social life? Definitely. Has it helped my flirting skills? Definitely. There's that. So I'm, as well as being an improviser, I'm an actress, writer, director. I'm a professional collaborator. So the fact that I started in improv, I mean, it's literally the foundation of everything else that I do. So I co-write kids shows with people. I act in plays, and I'm in a series that's coming out on TVNZ On Demand in July that I'm not allowed to say the title of. But the method that we created those scenes with was improv skills. We didn't have a script as such. There were sides that let you know what we needed to achieve in each scene, but the skills that we used to do it were improv. So I don't know. I guess it's kind of just part of the fabric of who I am now.
Yes, and would you like to do a quick example of an improv game? Perhaps I'd suggest something very basic, like the alphabet game. As in, like,
each line starts with a consecutive letter of the alphabet?
Yeah, just a made-up little scene.
Am I playing this game with you? Okay.
So just so that we don't have to fight around trying to come up with something, I'll just toss something out there. And in full disclosure, this is actually pre-written, this first sentence. So maybe I'm already starting off on the wrong foot.
No, not at all. Who says you can't pre-write? There are no real rules.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so all done with your car. She should be back up and running and good as new.
Better give you a hug then.
Can you do that during COVID?
Don't kiss me.
Everyone gets a kiss here. That's our motto. That's our slogan.
Fine.
Give me a kiss then.
Have this.
I hope I don't have COVID now.
Just kidding. I gave you something worse.
Keep away from me. I don't need any more diseases than I already have.
Love. I gave you love.
My, oh my. That is the worst disease of all.
No one will believe you.
Oh, I don't know about that. My father is a police officer.
Police officer?
Quite.
Right.
Should I call him and get him to arrest you for spreading the crime of love?
Try me.
Underneath it all, I think you are a good person, so maybe I won't.
Very well, good sir.
What method would you like to pay for your car repair with?
Kisses spelt with X's.
XXXOs. You know what? I'm going to start accepting that currency now because our interaction has changed me.
Zealand.
Yes, and that's how it's done.
Was that fun for you?
I had a great time. I even got a kiss out of it. This is the best podcast I've done yet.
Oh, good.
I'm not the only one who thinks harnessing improv could help my productivity. Publications like the Wall Street Journal and Forbes have described how business leaders have sought out improv consultants to take the same techniques used by jazz musicians and improv comedy performers and apply them to their own organizations. Concepts like not shooting down ideas immediately, rather accepting them and building upon them. Yes, and. Hit TV writer and producer Tina Fey gives one example in her book, Bossy Pants. If you're an improviser on stage, coming in pretending you're riding a bicycle, but your scene partner goes, "Oh look, a hamster and his little hamster wheel," you go with it. You're now a hamster. Rather than have everything grind to a halt because you want to clarify, you keep the momentum and adapt. Because in life, as in podcasting, not everything always goes according to plan. Sometimes a novel coronavirus throws a spanner in the works. Do you give up, or do you accept this new situation and adapt with the power of improv? Jazz legend Cy Hart made a big point about the value of gratitude. So in that vein, thank you to Mr. John Galliers for the iconic What a Predicament logo, and to Lucas Hogan and Marissa Holder for the theme song. Cheers to Kathleen and Cy. This tune here is one of his compositions. He's also in a fantastic folk band called Ellie Oak. There's a link to their latest single, The Farmer Ploughs On, in this episode description. Thanks again to all of my trial co-hosts and guests this season. Cheers to Carolina Simpson at NZMe, and thank you for listening. If you've got a predicament that's a pain in your side you'd like to hear me explore in Season 4 of What a Predicament, hit me up via the Watercat Productions website, watercat.co.nz. This watery deity says he has a task for me, but how could I possibly live up to his literally divine standards? Okay, think about it, Alex. You've already produced 30 episodes of the best podcast ever made. You've demonstrated you can go toe-to-toe with any supreme being. Okay, I'll do it. How can I help?